The safe house was built to keep enemies out. That was what Cassian Ward believed until Liora Kane asked why every lock was facing the wrong way. The drive had taken 4 hours. Liora had not slept. She had watched the trees change through the car window and counted the turns and understood, before the safe house came into view, that she did not know exactly where she was. That was the first thing she noted. The second was the gates. The third was the cameras. The fourth was the way Mara, the housekeeper who came to meet them, held her hands in front of her body rather than at her sides. Cassian walked the perimeter first. Stone walls, iron gates with electronic locks, cameras at every corner. He reported to Liora that it was clean. She was standing at the door to the bedroom wing. She had one hand on the doorframe and the other at her side. She said, "If this is a safe house, why does every lock face away from me?" Cassian stopped. He walked back to the front door. The lock was on the outer panel, the bedroom door, the outer panel again. He went through every door on the ground floor. Every lock was mounted on the exterior side of the frame. A door with its lock on the outside was not a door someone inside could control. He went to the window in the front room. The forest pressed close outside. He reached out and knocked on the glass. The sound was wrong. Not the sound of glass with depth and air behind it. The sound of glass backed with something. He pressed his face close. The trees were perfectly still. No wind movement, no variation in light. The forest outside was a projection. A high-quality image displayed on a screen behind the glass. He straightened. He looked at Liora. She said, "A house that protects me should have at least one door that obeys me." Cassian did not answer. He was recalculating everything he had been told this safe house was. He had grown up in a house that was not called a prison. It had been called protective custody. His father had been a witness in a case that mattered to people who had resources, and those people had decided that the safest place for his father's family was a house in the countryside with good locks and limited outside contact. No one had asked his mother whether she agreed. She had been told she was being kept safe. She had spent 14 months in that house without being able to call her sister, without being able to go to the market, without being able to open the front door, without a security escort. She had been told every one of these restrictions was protection. Cassian had been 9 years old. He had understood then what he had spent the rest of his career trying not to see in the work he did, that the language of safety and the architecture of confinement were often built from exactly the same materials. 3 days earlier, the threat had come through the right channels. A message from the Tallow Network, a minor rival house, ambitious but not powerful, referencing Liora by name and by condition. The message was specific enough to be credible. It was not specific enough to be a real operational plan. Victor Kane read it at 6 in the morning and called Helena Voss by 6:15. Helena Voss was the head of the Kane family council. She was 71 years old and had been in council governance for the better part of 40 years. She was not a warm woman, but she had learned over 4 decades exactly when warmth was the most effective tool. She arrived at Victor's office within the hour. She sat across from him and spoke about Liora, the way someone spoke about something precious and fragile that needed to be wrapped before it broke. She called Liora child. She said, "A mother should not have to hear threats while carrying the future of a house." What Helena did not say, because she had learned long ago that the things you did not say were more powerful than the things you did, was what she actually believed. She believed that Liora Kane was the most dangerous person in the house. Not because Liora was violent, not because Liora was disloyal, because Liora was capable. Liora managed the family welfare fund, which meant she had relationships with 6 allied families that did not pass through the council. Liora had opinions about how an heir should be raised that did not include the council's governance curriculum. Liora had, on 2 separate occasions, pointed out inconsistencies in council decisions that Helena had preferred to leave unexamined. A woman like that, given a child, would raise that child to think for itself. And an heir who thought for itself was an heir who might one day ask why the council needed to be this large. Helena said, "A mother should not have to hear threats while carrying the future of a house." She said the Safehouse in the northern forest had been prepared for exactly this kind of situation. She said the medical staff was already in position. She said there was a bodyguard assignment ready. She said all Victor needed to do was give the order. Victor did not want to give the order. He wanted to be with Liora. He wanted to put her in a car and drive somewhere only he knew and stay with her until the threat passed. But Helena reminded him, gently, patiently, of his father. His father had kept the heir close during a threat and lost the heir because of it. Victor signed the order. He did not read the full document. There were 3 pages. He signed the first. The 3rd page contained the security protocol addendum. The addendum specified that all external communications from the Safehouse would route through council security for threat verification. It did not say Liora could not call him, but it ensured that any call she made would pass through a system Helena controlled before reaching his phone. Victor did not read the addendum. That was the error, not the signature, the absence of the question that should have come before it. He had not asked Liora whether she could leave. He had not asked whether the doors faced the right way. He had given the order and called it protection. At the Safehouse, Liora was making a list. She was making it in her head because the paper on the writing desk was thin, and she was not certain who reviewed what was written in this room. Lock positions, exterior only, windows, non-opening, projected exterior. Telephone, she had tried it the first evening. The number dialed was labeled Victor in the directory. The voice that answered was a woman she did not recognize who said, "This is Kane Council Communications. Please state your name and the nature of your call." She had hung up without speaking. She had then sat on the edge of the bed and thought about her mother. Her mother had been a woman of precise, particular intelligence who had made the mistake of marrying into a house that valued intelligence in women only until it became inconvenient. She had not been dangerous. She had been effective. She had managed accounts, mediated disputes between 3 allied families, and had once prevented a war that would have cost the house 2 territories and 15 lives. She had also, at a critical moment, disagreed with the council. She had disagreed about something related to her son, about who would raise him and how, about whether council decisions superseded a mother's knowledge of her own child. The word they had used was unstable, not angry, not wrong, unstable. The word that made disagreement into a diagnosis and removed the need to answer the argument by removing the person making it. Liora had grown up seeing her mother through glass and understanding that some words were not descriptions. They were tools. Her mother had been placed in a house very much like this one. Not exactly like this one. Different walls, different name, but the same arrangement of locks. The same specific unavailability of exits that were presented as features rather than absences. Her mother had been described as emotionally volatile. She had been described this way by people who had an interest in that description. The description had been used to limit her access to her own child. Liora had grown up seeing her mother through windows. She was not going to do that to her child. She told Cassian about the phone. He said nothing for a moment. Then he picked up the phone and dialed a different number. The line connected to the same automated response. He put the phone down. He said, "The switchboard is closed. Every outgoing call routes to the same place," she said. "Victor has been calling too. I know he has." Cassian looked at the phone. He said, "And someone has been intercepting." At the Kane estate, Victor had called 4 times. He had called at 8 in the morning, when he woke up, and the absence of Liora beside him made the day feel wrong before it had started. He had called at noon, when a meeting ended early, and he thought he could spend 5 minutes hearing her voice. He had called at 5, when the light changed, and he thought about the window in their room at home, and how she always said the late afternoon light made everything look like a painting. He had called at 10 at night because he could not sleep. Each time Helena had answered, each time she had said, "Resting, advised rests, the air needs quiet, the line could be traced." Victor had believed her. He had believed her, not because he was foolish, but because he had been believing Helena Voss for 11 years, and his belief in her had never cost him anything he had noticed. The cost had been accumulating in a safe house 4 hours away. He had not known what to subtract. Each time Helena had been present when the line was answered. Each time she had said, Liora was resting. The doctor had advised minimal stimulation. The communications protocol was for the safety of the heir. Victor had believed her. He had sat with his phone in his hand after each call and told himself that Liora was safe, and that this was what protection looked like from the outside. He had not asked the right question. He had not asked, "Does my wife know she is safe?" Cassian found the camera on the second morning. He was checking the room for structural irregularities, which was something he did in every space he was assigned to hold. He found the camera mounted in the corner near the ceiling on the bedroom side wall. It was not pointed at the door. A camera meant to protect the occupant would watch the door. This one watched the bed and the writing desk. He said to Liora, "The camera in your room is not a security camera." She said, "I know." She had known since the first night. She had slept on the far side of the bed and written nothing at the desk. She said, "They are not watching for danger. They are watching for behavior." She said it the way someone said something they had already understood and were tired of being right about. Dr. Marius Vale arrived on the 3rd day. He was the council's medical representative. He was a quiet man who communicated primarily through the language of caution and the language of risk. He asked Liora several questions about her sleep and her appetite. He noted her answers in a file. She said, "Are you here to help me stay calm or to write that I am not?" He looked at her for a long time. He wrote something in his file. She saw, before he closed it, that the header read, Maternal instability assessment. Preliminary. She said nothing else. But she told Cassian, and Cassian noted the phrase in his own memory, and the phrase sat there between them, like a door they had not yet opened. Cassian found the medical room on the third afternoon. He had asked Mara about the lower level, and Mara had said it was storage. He had gone down anyway. The room was not storage. It was clean and cold and equipped with monitoring hardware and a bed with safety rails. On the table beside the bed was a folder. The folder contained a document titled Pre-Delivery Custody Readiness, Kane Safehouse Protocol. The document had been created 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks before the tallow threat had arrived. Cassian stood in the room for a long time. He understood what this meant. The threat had not created the room. The room had been waiting for the threat. He brought Liora downstairs. She read the document. She looked at the date. She looked at the room. She said, "A prison does not become a safe house because you put my child's name on the door." She said it quietly, which was more frightening than if she had said it loudly. Cassian asked Liora about the design of the house. She said Victor had shown her the original blueprints once when they were considering using the property for something else. She said, "There was a maintenance tunnel. It ran from the back of the house to a water station at the edge of the forest property." She said, "It's been closed, but it's still there," she said. The library. Cassian went to the library. Behind a wine rack that did not move smoothly, he found a panel. Behind the panel was a server unit. Liora had told him about the emergency access port that the old blueprints had included. She had said, "Look for a panel behind something that shouldn't be heavy." He opened the server. The files were not encrypted. The emergency access port only listed maintenance logs by default. But Liora had known the folder naming structure from the old blueprints, and she had told Cassian exactly which directory to open. The files had been placed by someone who expected no one in this room would know to look. The first file was titled Limited Supervised Maternal Contact. Liora Kane, her name had been filled in. The heir's name had been left as a blank for the birth record to complete. The document laid out the terms by which Liora would be permitted to see her child after delivery. Scheduled visits, counsel-supervised contact, a review process for maternal fitness. The review criteria included emotional stability under stress, behavior consistent with heir-focused parenting rather than maternal attachment, absence of conflict with council governance decisions. Cassian read the last criterion twice. He then opened his own file, his assignment record. He had been listed since the beginning as Containment Escort, not Bodyguard, Containment Escort. He sat on the library floor for a moment. He thought about the house he had grown up in when his father was a witness. He thought about the way the adults had called it protective custody. He thought about the way none of them had been allowed to leave. He thought about the specific architecture of safety that was built without exits. He went back to Liora. He put both documents on the table in front of her. Liora said, "Now you know why every lock faces away from me." She looked at the documents. She did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had been braced for confirmation and had just received it. She said, "They are not protecting my child from danger. They are protecting the child from me." She picked up the limited supervised contact file. She said, "I am taking this with me." Cassian said, "Where?" She said, "Somewhere Victor can read it." The call from Helena came the next morning. She was calm. She said the security situation had escalated. She said Liora needed to move to the lower medical area for the safety of the heir. She said a team was on the way. Cassian asked about evacuation routes. Helena said this was not an evacuation. This was a transfer. He asked where Liora would go after the medical review. Helena said the medical team would advise. He said, "I need an answer before the team arrives." Helena said the answer was above his clearance. The team arrived 40 minutes later. They had 8 vehicles. They had the Kane house insignia on their jackets. They had a document authorizing pre-delivery custody transfer. One paragraph in the document read, "Upon transfer to medical custody, maternal instability review protocol becomes active and binding." Cassian read it twice. He understood what active and binding meant. The moment Liora walked into that medical room, the heir fitness review would start. And the review had been designed to produce one outcome. Mara came to stand in the hallway. She was watching the vehicles through the window. Cassian said, "You know about the tunnel," she said. "I know." He said, "You have the key," she said. "I have the first key." The gate at the other end was welded shut after the last time. He said, "When was the last time?" She said, "Because once I waited behind that same door while they carried my son away." She gave him the key. Cassian went back to Liora. He said, "My order was to keep you inside." She looked at him. She said, "Then decide if you are guarding me or guarding the door." He unclipped his Kane identification badge and set it on the table. He was not resigning. He was removing the part of himself that had been assigned as a containment tool. He pulled the wine rack away from the wall. He took Mara's key and opened the panel. Liora took the files. They went into the maintenance tunnel. The tunnel was narrow and cold and smelled of old water and stone. It had been built into the original structure of the house in a period when the Kane family expected that emergencies might require an exit that did not go through the front door. That had been a reasonable expectation. The people who had repurposed the house for the protocol had known the tunnel was there. They had not removed it. They had locked the outer gate and filled the entrance behind the wine rack with enough furniture to discourage casual discovery. They had calculated that no one held inside would know to look. They had not calculated Liora. Liora moved carefully. Her hand stayed on the right wall for balance. Cassian's headlamp from the maintenance kit threw a circle of light on the uneven floor ahead. 200 meters. Cassian had told her the distance before they started. She had nodded. She had not asked him to go first. She had simply walked in after him and let the dark close around them both. Liora moved carefully. The ground was uneven. Cassian stayed a half step ahead and a half step to the side, the geometry of someone who was clearing a path without crowding the person behind him. The tunnel ran 200 meters. At the end was a gate. The gate had been welded at the latch. Cassian opened his maintenance kit and worked the weld for 6 minutes. The gate came free. They emerged into the edge of the tree line. The water station was visible through the trees. Victor was standing at the water station. He had received a call from Helena 20 minutes earlier, telling him Cassian had gone off protocol and Liora was in danger. He had arrived with 4 of his own men. He had arrived because Helena had told him Cassian was unstable. and that Liora was being used to manipulate a guard with a personal grievance. He saw Cassian come out of the tree line with Liora. His first instinct was what Helena had planted in it. He said, "Cassian, lower your weapon." Cassian did not have his weapon raised. He had it holstered. He said, "I know what this looks like." Victor said, "Step away from my wife." Cassian took one step sideways. He did not go far. Liora said, "Victor." Victor looked at her. She said, "Read what you called safety. Ask yourself why I had to escape to bring it to you." She held out the limited supervised contact file. He took it. He read the first paragraph. His name was in the activation clause. His signature on the Safehouse order had been the trigger for the protocol. Helena arrived at the water station with 2 vehicles. She assessed the scene. She said, "If she runs from safety, she proves she was never fit to raise the heir." Victor looked up from the file. Helena said, "A mother can love an heir, but only the council can raise one without weakness." Victor looked at Liora. He had expected, when he arrived at the water station, to find evidence of what Helena had described. He had expected to find a guard who had been manipulated by a frightened woman. He had expected instability. What he found was his wife standing at the edge of the forest holding a folder. She was tired. She was at the end of a pregnancy. She had crawled through a tunnel in the dark to bring him a document she should never have needed to carry. And she was standing straight. She was not crying. She was not pleading. She was waiting for him to look at what he had signed. Victor looked at Liora. He had been a boss for 9 years. He had read thousands of documents. He had signed his name to alliances and dissolution orders and contracts that rearranged the lives of hundreds of people. He had never looked at his own signature and felt what he felt now. She was holding the files they had not wanted her to find. She was not running. She was standing at the tree line, waiting for her husband to look at her the way she needed him to. Victor looked at Helena. He said, "When did you prepare the medical room?" Helena said, "In anticipation of the threat," he said. "The file says 3 weeks before the threat arrived." Helena said, "We anticipated it." He said, "You anticipated an heir that hadn't been threatened yet and prepared a custody protocol before the threat existed." He said, "You didn't protect my heir. You used my heir as a reason to take my wife." Dr. Marius had arrived with the second vehicle. Victor turned to him. He said, "Did you evaluate Liora as maternally unstable?" Dr. Marius said, "I conducted a preliminary assessment." Victor said, "Was the outcome predetermined?" The doctor was quiet for a long time. He said, "The protocol had already been prepared. I was given the file after my first visit." Victor turned back to Helena. Helena said, "The family's future required stability that emotion could not provide." She said, "A mother can love an heir, but only the council." Victor said, "Then let my child be raised by a mother, not by a council that thinks love is a weakness." Helena was detained before she could reach her vehicle. Not because Victor wanted to punish her quickly, but because the files Liora had carried out of the tunnel referenced 15 other protocol activations at the same Safehouse over the previous 20 years. 15 other women, 15 other heirs, 15 other files with names already filled in. There was a great deal to account for. Victor signed 6 laws before the week was over. He did not sign them in the council chamber. He signed them at the kitchen table of the house, Liora was staying in while the estate was reviewed. Every safe house maintained under Kane authority was to have interior locks on all private rooms. Every person held in protective custody was to have the right to contact one person outside the council system without interception. No monitoring equipment was to be placed in sleeping areas without the written and witnessed consent of the occupant. No safe house protocol was to include provisions for the removal of parental rights or the limitation of parental contact. Every protocol related to heir protection required the signature of both parents and a witness independent of the council. A bodyguard or escort had the right and duty to refuse orders that converted protective custody into imprisonment. He signed them without ceremony. He had been a boss for 9 years. He had signed a great many things in that time. He had signed none of them the way he signed these. He signed them in the specific way that a person signed something when they understood that the signature itself was the admission, that the document was not a policy. It was a correction of something that had been wrong before the policy existed. Liora was in the next room. He came to the doorway and looked at her. He said, "I sent you somewhere I called safe and never asked whether you could leave." She said, "You can apologize to me as a husband, but you will repair this as a boss." He nodded. He went back to the table. He had work to do. Cassian came by the house once the following week. Victor said, "You disobeyed me." Cassian said, "No, I obeyed the only order that was never supposed to change. I protected your wife." Victor looked at him. He said, "The post is yours." Cassian said, "Then I'll guard her, not the door." He left. Liora stood at the window of the house and looked at the actual forest outside. Real trees, real light, real wind moving through branches that moved because the world was moving. She said to herself, not to anyone in the room, a safe house is not safe if the person inside has to escape it. She put one hand on the window. She put the other on her child. The glass was cold. The forest was real. Victor Kane sent his wife to a safe house because he believed danger was coming from outside. But Cassian Ward looked at the locks, the windows, the phone, and the cameras and realized the danger had already been built into the walls. Liora Kane was not being protected until her child was born. She was being contained until the council could take that child from her arms. By dawn, the Kane family learned a rule every empire should fear. A locked door is not protection. A mother is not a vessel, and no house is safe if the person inside has to escape it to be free.